My name is Kathy Hirsch. We're in the home of Eleanor Stritter. We're doing an interview for the Pinecrest Pioneers Oral History Archive. And today's date is the 8th of September, 2015. Eleanor, I'd like to start out by hearing a little bit of your background and like where you were born and how is it that you wound up here in South Florida?
I was born in New York City, but my family lived on Long Island. And I started the first 2 years of my life, we were in Astoria, Long Island. But my parents bought a home in Laurelton, Long Island, which was a new development out a little further on the south shore of Long Island. And when we moved there, they moved into the house in August 15th, 1929. And of course, then that was the year of the Big Depression. And people around lost their houses because they were just moving in and they couldn't afford, people were losing their jobs and so forth. And my parents took a second mortgage. My father didn't lose his job, but anyhow, we stayed there. And so I grew up in Laurelton, which was a great place. There were wonderful people. And gradually it collected itself and people began moving it. There were a lot of empty homes when I was a little girl. Anyhow, I went to PS 156 and then the Mary Louis Academy in Jamaica, Long Island. And then I went to Queens College. And when I was at Queens, my father died suddenly. He was just 50 years old. He was an engineer with Consolidated Edison. He was in charge of one of their big power plants. And anyhow, there was an accident at the plant, a big explosion. And he was home. It was Christmas morning. Well, that was, I won't get too much into that, but
It sounds interesting.
He had to race in. He said to my mother and me, "Will you go on with," we were just ready to go to church Christmas morning. And he said, "You go ahead, I have to go to the plant." And some people were injured, they were in the hospital. So for 3 days, he was away all the time, running around to the hospital and the plant, getting things straightened out. And anyhow, a cousin of mine was home for the holidays, and she was home from college, and she was having a luncheon. And I went to the luncheon, and when I got there, I thought something is wrong here. People were acting strangely, I thought. And then I heard my aunt crying in the kitchen, just sobbing and crying. And I said, "What's wrong? What's happened?" And she said, "Your father died." And I thought, well, she's lost her mind. I had breakfast with my father at home. He had come home and he was taking the weekend off because he'd been gone for 3 days with all the other stuff. So anyhow, they drove me home, and yes, he had died.
He had a heart attack?
He had a coronary thrombosis, and I guess it was all the stress and commotion that had been going on, and it killed him. Well, I decided I finished the term in school, and I finished in January. And then I said to my mother, "I'm going to leave school." And she said, "No, you don't have to do that. You can stay, I'll manage." Well, she hadn't worked in 26 years, the years that they were married. And, but she had a job within a month of my father's death. And she said, "During the Depression, I was like a bookkeeper on a peanut stand. I can handle everything." But I thought, no, I can't. And then my grandmother's brother, who was a partner in Harry Content and Company in New York, he said he would give me what I needed for school. And I said, "It isn't just the school money. I want to help my mother. I don't want to leave her with all the bills." I said, "We have a second mortgage now," and they had paid the first mortgage, but we still have the second mortgage and all kinds of things. So I left school, but I made the arrangements. I had everything in order so that I could come back at night. And then I had worked the first 2 summers that I was in college. I worked at the Jamaica Savings Bank and at the Wise Publishing Company in Manhattan. And I thought, well, they were both, I didn't like the publishing company, but the bank was very nice. But I thought, no, I just had a feeling I wanted to be a part of Pan American. And I thought, well, I knew nothing about it other than when we'd go by LaGuardia Airport, I'd see all the lights and see Pan American, and it looked so classy to me. So I went and I applied, and I got a miserable job. It was just, it was in the file department. They were redoing the files at Pan Am. And they hired a file specialist, and then she had a couple of girls working with her. I was one of them. And I was delighted to be a part of Pan Am, because whenever there was an opening, they would post it on the bulletin boards, and you could apply for it. And I finished my probationary period, and there was a job posted, and I bid for it, and I had an interview that I thought went very well, and I didn't get the job. So my supervisor said to me, "I guess you wonder why you didn't get that job." And I said, "That's right." She said, "Well, you're my best worker, and I didn't want to lose you, so I lied about you. I told them all kinds of bad things about you." So I just continued doing my job, and I didn't react in anger with her. So
that you'd applied
I didn't
for.
get the first one that I applied for, but then the next one that came up was in the passport office, passport and transfer office. And I applied for that and got the job, and they put me in charge of crew passports. So the crews then needed visas for every place that they went, because it was after the war, and so I had to work closely with scheduling and see to it that they were documented for wherever scheduling was sending them. And so I got to know all the crews. Everybody was coming and going. It was a busy office, and I worked with the State Department, the passport office in New York, and with the various consulates, getting the visas from them. So anyhow, one day they were transferring a bunch of people from Miami into New York for a new airplane. I guess it was the Connie, the Constellation. And these young men came, and they were all checking in. I was giving them their papers to fill out, and I was seeing what I had to get for them, and they had to apply for passports and so forth. And one of the girls said to me later, one of the girls in my office, "Oh, you're going to hear from that man again," who was sitting opposite me at the desk. We had tables where they could fill out their papers, but he was sitting opposite me. I said, no. I said, "He's married. He just wanted to know about New York and, the shows and the city and where he's going to live and so forth." So, but I had seen the other fellow they were very close, and I thought, "Oh, he's really an interesting looking man. He's handsome, and he's so well groomed," and I thought he looked pretty nice. Well, that turned out to be my husband, because later I told him, after he had his pictures taken for the passport, I said, "Just send the extra pictures, drop them in company mail, and they'll get to me, and I'll get the visas that you need for your passport." Well, he came in and brought the pictures, and I said, "Oh, you didn't have to do that. You could have just..." He said, "Well, I just decided I was going to be out here, so I thought I'd come back with the pictures." And he brought me a little book, "The Land Columbus Loved." And he said, "Have you been here?" I said, "I haven't been anywhere. I just started with the company last year, and I don't have any money even to take advantage of the discounts." So anyhow, he said, "Well, I'm going into training, which will be quite a while, but when I'm finished, would you like to have dinner some evening and we'll go out?" Well, anyhow, that's how I met Murray. His name was John Murray Stritter. His father was John Murray. No, his father was John Joseph Stritter. His brother was John Joseph Jr., and Murray's mother's maiden name was Murray. She was Emily Murray. So anyhow, getting to the Murrays, he was always known as Murray. And his grandfather had a big farm in northwestern Illinois, in Stockton. And all through his childhood and even in his adulthood, whenever he had free time, he was out at the farm. He loved the farm and loved his grandpa. Well, he told me that when he graduated from Northwestern University in 1942, and he also graduated from the CPTP program, the Civilian Pilot Training Program that the government had put in universities. And so he finished that program and college at the same time. And he belonged to the Air Force because of the CPTP program, and because they didn't have enough pilots in those days, and not enough airplanes or pilots. So he was waiting for his assignment from the Air Force, and they sent him to Pan American in Chicago because the government had big contracts with Pan Am. And So he went to Pan Am and he was hired, and they sent him down to Coconut Grove to the Dinner Key the air base there, the flying boat base. So he was flying out of there, and he was looking immediately for land because he wanted to have some land. He wanted to farm something. And he looked all around and he saw this land down here. He was looking
In Pinecrest.
in Pinecrest, and he bought 20 acres. He didn't have any money. He was just out of school, but he borrowed from his father and paid back every cent that he owed him. But he bought this piece of land, 20 acres, and he thought eventually he'd build a house on part of it and farm the rest of it while he was flying with Pan Am. So that was it. And anyhow, we met and we started dating, and then he was transferred back to Miami. And I thought, well, that's the end of that. But we kept in touch. He'd come up whenever he could. He'd come up to New York and we'd see each other. And my mother and I used to go to Miami Beach on vacation, our 2 weeks vacation. And so we'd come down, and Murray would try to bid a trip where he'd have more time around. So we'd date while I was down here. And he'd drive me down here to show me his property. And there was nothing here. There was US 1 was just nothing, no car, an occasional car.
This was the 40s.
This was in the 40s, yes. Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying to think. My father died in 45, and I started with Pan American in 1946, and I met him in 1947. And
so it was just after the war.
Yes.
So there was nothing
Nothing.
Here. Can you remember any land?
A few little houses, and someone, I forget the name of the builder, but those houses, the little houses here, just south of here, that had the broad fireplaces. There were brick fireplaces, and they were little houses. There was some down here, and anyhow, he'd bring me down to see his property, which was just all open. And there was a farmer across North Kendall Drive, and he was growing strawberries and tomatoes.
Do you remember his name?
I don't. I should have looked through some old papers to look up some things, but I don't remember. Oh, I know where there's a picture of him in Baptist Hospital across from the gift shop. They had a big picture of him on his tractor, and he was doing a lot of work around in the area. And
that had to have been the guy with the bird houses that built the bird houses. That where Dadeland is, there were tomato groves there. There was no Dadeland, of course, in those days when you and your husband came here.
We got married in 1955. And I came down here. We had a little apartment in the Gables, and we used to come out here. He had put some trees in. He had to have dynamite blow out a lot of the rock. It was so hard you couldn't plant. And so he had a man. The man was Mr. Ansett, his name was. He had a nursery on, I forget what, it might have been 104th Street, just east of the highway. But there was the Ansett Nursery, and he did the blasting for us, and then we put in some trees. But we just had trees on 5 acres, and we had a wonderful neighbor, Phil Mulhenrick, who lived on the next property. He had a mango grove, and he said, "Don't put in a well. I have a well, and I don't use it anymore, but I have the fire hose and all, and you can." So on our first anniversary, I was out there with the fire hose watering our trees, and Murray was leaving on a trip, and he flew over, and he said, "I could see you out there with the hose watering the trees," when he left. So it was quite an adventure, being part of Pan American and meeting Murray, and then my life here. And I've always considered the mother and father of Pinecrest, Elio and Faye Fueo, who lived down at 60th Court. because their house was burglarized. And Murray and I used to walk every morning. We'd walk about 2 miles before breakfast. And our neighbor, who moved in next door, came by one morning and she said, "I know you're friendly with that elderly couple who walk around the neighborhood every day." And she said, "I just passed their house." She was taking a walk, and she said, "The police were there and there's some kind of commotion, and I thought you'd like to know." So Murray and I went right over, and they told us that they had been burglarized. The house was just ransacked, and they were lovely people and older people.
So what was their surname again?
It was Fueo, Elio and Faye Fueo.
Fueo.
And it was through them that we started the neighborhood crime watches through their break-in. And then the gentleman, I don't remember his name, but somebody who had arranged for I can't think of the word, but to arrange the city of some other area. I think it might have been on Key Biscayne or something, but then they started the work here to make us
to incorporate.
Incorporate, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I always felt that they were the mother and father of Pinecrest, because it was through their break-in that we started meeting and starting the
Did they ever find the burglars?
I think they did eventually. I think, I don't remember the details of it. I'm getting a little mixed up now with, there was another family down the street here that was later, that their house was burglarized, and they even threatened they were going to drown them in the pool, and it was a terrible thing. But anyhow, nobody was drowned. And
so it was a home invasion then?
Yes, yes. Uh-huh.
So was it, do you think, a little lawless here, or was it just frontier?
No, these were just, this was just an unusual experience, I think, at the time. But because we were in peace here, we had no problems, and lovely neighbors. We knew the neighbors who lived on the street here. Eventually, people, houses were here. And the Joneses, Suzanne and Al Jones, he was a marine biologist for the government. And he's down, he just called me last week. He's in Eastridge, and his wife died earlier this year. And we all knew each other in those days. Paul Mayer and Joan Mayer, they're both doctors. They're retired. He and I are the same age, and she's a little younger. They live right across the street, and they've been our good neighbors and friends ever since we came here.
Maybe we should interview them.
I don't think he's well, but maybe he's, I call every once in a while, and Joan will just say, he's so-so, but she was at the last senior luncheon at Pinecrest. She came to that. And
so you started out with 5 acres of mango trees?
no, he had the 20 acres is what he bought.
But he planted 5.
But he planted in 5, and we had to have the dynamite done there to be able to plant the trees. It was such solid rock.
So you planted mangoes because of the neighbor who had mangoes?
No, he was always studying. He, as I say, he graduated from Northwestern University, but he went to the University of Miami. And he was in and out because he was working for Pan Am, and he'd go when he could. And I would bring his classwork in or tests work in, and the secretary he was taking math and chemical courses, and she would say, he is remarkable, the things he accomplishes. Well, he was a very dedicated man. He really concentrated on things, and he did things well. As a matter of fact, after we got married, when I first met his dentist, he said to me, well, you must be the perfect woman. I said, no, I'm not by a long shot. And he said, well, he is such a perfectionist. He said, if I ever fly across the Atlantic, I want to go with him, because he does everything. He wants to know everything, and he is a perfectionist. Well,
so he continued then with Pan Am in civilian life after the war. Okay.
He retired from Pan Am in, I guess it was 1978. And that's when we moved here because he was transferred back to New York, and we lived in Connecticut, in Greenwich, Connecticut. And then when he retired, we came back to Miami because we were down here frequently looking at the land and checking. And he was trying to get the farmer across the way to take care of our property and our trees. But he couldn't. He had his hands full with whatever else he was doing.
Which farmer was that?
That was the man whose name or whose picture is in Baptist Hospital, opposite in the main hall there downstairs off the entranceway. And I don't remember his name, but Mr. Ansett, we used to call him the French planter. He wasn't French, I don't know what he was, but he used to remind us of what was the movie? Was it South Pacific? There was the French planter. I forget what his name was in the movie, but we used to call Mr. Ansett that name. Anyhow, there were a lot of wonderful people here, always. We always had good neighbors and good friends, and were very happy in Pinecrest. And then, of course, this community center is marvelous. It's just a perfect place to do all kinds of things.
So you're pleased with the way Pinecrest has evolved since incorporation?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
There were other Pan Am people that settled here in Pinecrest, were there not?
Yes, yes.
Did you know them?
Yes, we knew some of them. Of course, Murray knew them, and I didn't know them all, but I knew a lot of people in New York from working at Pan Am in New York, but down here I'd meet them at various events and things, but I wasn't close to them. But there were people that we'd get together with, but they lived in the Gables or other places. But Bob, that you mentioned before, he lived down here. And he and his wife were a lovely couple, and as I say, he passed away this year. And
isn't there some sort of Pan Am association of people that used to work
well, we
there?
still meet. I meet with the pilots' wives once a month, and the pilots are meeting. Pan Am people are meeting all over the world. And in 2001, we had a big convention in Baltimore, and I was on the committee for that. I worked for over a year on the committee. And then I didn't get to go. They even were providing a room for us and everything up at the hotel. But Murray was ill. He was not well. And he said to me, "You go. You've worked on this thing. Go." I said, "No, I wouldn't go without you." So we sat that one out. And it was a very successful, a wonderful convention. But people came from Japan, from Europe, from all over. And they're all meeting. There are still groups meeting all over the world. So our pilots meet, the ground people meet, and we've had a paper called Pan Amigo that has been just a little paper that was put out by one of the people who formerly worked for the company.
Is that still going on, that paper?
I'm not sure, because I haven't received a reminder to renew my subscription, and I haven't been getting it. So I'll have to check on that. I'll call her. Her name was Patty Jackson, the lady who was doing it, and she was great. But she lived up in north of Miami, up a little bit further, but in Dade County.
So it's the pilots' wives.
Mm-hmm.
Was that kind of a group, a social group?
Yes, it was a group that was formed. I think the group must be 70 years old now, something I forgot. But years ago, a group of the pilots' wives got together. You know, the Pan Am trips were long. The men would be gone for 2 weeks or sometimes even more. And the ladies would help each other when they were in need, and some of them had children, and the kids would be breaking their arms or something, and if they'd need help. So we'd help each other. And we'd get together, and it had started before I was married and in the group, but I joined as soon as I came down here. And we used to meet once a month, and we used to meet at each other's homes at first, and everybody would bring a dish, and we'd have lunch, and we used to have programs then too. We'd have people come in and do a program, or one of the members who had some specialty would do a program.
Do you remember what any of them were about?
Oh, well, there was one, Carmen Cummings. She was a psychiatrist, and she would do programs on mental conditions and problems, psychiatric problems and so forth. And there were other things, I don't even remember now what we would do, but we had people come in about gardening and so forth. But then as we grew older, of course, nobody was up to doing all the preparation for the meetings. We had about more than 100 people in the group. And
Wow.
now we don't have many. We just have usually about maybe 18 or 20 show up. And Mr. Thomas Mays, who was with Merrill Lynch, he is my financial advisor. And when he found out about Pan American and my connection with the Clipper Club, the Pilots' Wives Club, he said, I've had a lifelong love affair with Pan American, because he was from Virginia, but his father was in the diplomatic corps. And they lived in Europe and Latin America, and they always traveled on Pan Am. Of course, that was the big international carrier. So he said he had little autograph books, and he used to ask the captain of the flight to sign his book. So he said someday he's going to go looking in his parents' attic. He said he knows he has things packed away, and see if he has a book with Murray's signature in it. And but he was so interested in Pan Am and Pan Am history and so forth. So he invites the ladies of the club occasionally to have lunch. He takes us someplace for lunch.
Very
and
nice.
It's very, very nice.
So you called it the Clipper Club?
Clipper Club, yes. They were the Pan American Clippers, they called the ships, the planes. So we were
But
the
the
Clipper
women's
Club.
club, the
We were
wives.
the women, yes. And the men.
What did you call yourselves? The Clipper Club?
The Clipper Club.
Okay.
We're still the Clipper Club. And the men were just the pilots group.
And did they socialize a lot?
Oh yes, they met every month too, the last Thursday of the month. They're still meeting, as far as I know. But Bob had told me he couldn't go anymore. He said, I hear he had flown all over the world, but he said to get on 826 to go up to the meetings, he said, I can't face it anymore, the traffic. So the traffic is so treacherous, and well, anyhow.
That's interesting that they would, having flown all over the world and then be defeated by 826, the Palmetto Expressway.
Yes, in his old age, he said, I can't face that. Oh.
So, was there a boom period in Pinecrest that you saw a lot of construction going on?
Well, I guess I don't really know what year, but I think when this started on our grove, and then there was a lot of activity. I don't know what year it was, but people started coming and they were building and doing all kinds of things.
So tell us how the grove developed, and where did you sell your mangoes?
Oh, we had Mr. Parrish, who had a mango grove, and he had a packing house down in Homestead. He used to work for Mr. Mulhenrick, who had the property next to us. So we were introduced to him by Phil Mulhenrick, and he used to do the picking, packing, and shipping. And he had outlets in New York. He used to ship our mangoes to Europe and all over. And even after Murray died and after I sold the grove, I used to get calls occasionally, and they'd say, where can we get Stritter mangoes? I said, you can't get them anymore because Mr. Stritter is deceased and the grove is not the grove anymore.
So they were branded then, Stritter mangoes.
Yes, So they used to go all over.
And was it one kind of mango or several?
We had Tommy Atkins and Kits, and also a few avocado trees, but mainly mangoes. The whole thing was mangoes.
Was there a market for the Florida avocados?
And we really weren't doing much with them. It was local. We used to sell to local stores and so forth. And I even developed a few customers around, and I used to take the station wagon and deliver up to a market at, I can't think of the name of the place now. It was Red Road, and it was where there was a well-known pharmacy on the corner. And I can't remember now what they called it, but I used to sell, right near there was a grocery store. And they always were calling up and saying, do you have any mangoes? We want mangoes, we need mangoes. And so I'd pack up some boxes and take them up and sell them to them. And also to the, there was an Indian restaurant in the Gables on, was it Merrick Parkway?
House of India.
Anyhow, I used to sell mangoes to them. I would take the mangoes up there. And so it was funny. We enjoyed it. It was great. And Murray, he worked every day of his life. When he retired from Pan Am, he was out there in the morning after breakfast. He'd work until lunchtime, doing hard labor. And he'd come in and have lunch and rest for a while, then go out again and work until dinner time. And then he'd come in and shower and dress and have dinner and then spend the evening listening to music. He belonged to a music group too, a men's music group. They were men from this area and from the Gables and Coconut Grove. And they used to meet once a month. And several of them owned music stores, and they would have a program, and they were mainly interested in opera and classical music. So and it was a men's group. But when we got married, they were all curious. No one thought Murray was going to get married. They wanted to meet the bride. So they invited the ladies one night. Well, they never got rid of us after that. We were part of it. So that was a wonderful group, too, the music group. And there was an elderly Italian man who used to live down in this area. And he moved up further in the state. He lived alone. And he had a magnificent collection of records. He was from Italy, and he had met Caruso, and he worked, as a young man, he worked in some kind of an opera house as an usher or something. And then when he came to New York, he worked at the Metropolitan Opera. So he knew a great deal about opera and opera singers, and he used to do programs, and we would go to these things, and we'd all take turns doing a program, having the meeting at our homes and doing the music program. So that was another interesting group.
It sounds like you didn't watch much television.
No, we didn't watch television at all. We were always busy with something outside of, well, we liked to read and we liked music, and I was busy with other things with the church group. And
Tell us about the church you belonged to.
well, first it was in the Gables, because we lived on Santander, and we went to the church there. And then when we moved down here, finally came back, and it was at Epiphany Parish, and that's been our church ever since. And then I had a funny experience after we moved in. There was a pilot, Jim Sheehan, who used to call up all the time, and he'd kid me. He'd pretend he was Mr. Tripp calling, or they wanted Murray that was scheduling calling, and they wanted him right away or something. So when we moved in down here, I had a call one day, and he said, "Mrs. Stritter, this is your pastor, Monsignor O'Dowd." And I said, "Oh, is it you? Is it really you?" And I thought it was Jim. And he said, "Mrs. Stritter, this is your pastor." Well, it was Monsignor O'Dowd welcoming us to the parish. Oh, I nearly died. I said, "You must think I'm crazy." Well, he laughed. He thought it was so funny. And when I told Monsignor O'Doherty, who is our pastor now, I told him once, and he just laughed so. He thought it was so funny that I was imitating with an Irish accent and pretending.
So this pilot was famous for his pranks.
Yes, So
It sounds like a wonderful life.
well, it was a blessing, and my going to Pan American was the most wonderful thing. It opened up a whole different world to me. Well, before that, I was happy too. I had a good home and good parents and family and friends, but Pan American the people were wonderful, really wonderful people. And when I became the supervisor of the employment office for the Atlantic Division, and I had never done, well, when I first went in, they were phasing out the crew passports. So the supervisor he was the personnel and industrial relations superintendent. he was my top boss, and he came and he said to me, well, I guess you know your job is going to be eliminated because they're not going to need visas anymore for the crews at the end of the war. And he said, but I have something else in mind for you. I'm going to put you in personnel in interviewing. And I said, I don't know anything about interviewing. He said, that's all right. You know what kind of people we have here. You know all these crew members, you know the people, and you know what we want. And he said, here's a book, read the book. So I started interviewing, and then I became the supervisor of the employment office, and I was that until we married. So I had many wonderful opportunities and experiences with Pan American.
Did you eventually get to travel a lot?
Oh, I went all over the world with Murray, and after we were married, he would, if he had a trip that looked good, that had extra time, or he thought it wasn't too crowded, he'd check with scheduling, not scheduling, but reservations. And if they weren't too crowded, he'd get me a ticket. And he'd say, just be ready anytime, be ready to go. And I had a little case, and I'd put things in his suitcase and just carry. And I arrived in Japan one time with my little thing, and they said, where's your luggage? And I said, this is it. I went every place. We had a temporary assignment in Australia, which was wonderful. It was like early America. It was
How long were you there?
only 2 months. He could have had a 6-month, but he didn't think we wanted to be away that long, and he didn't apply for it. But then somebody who took a 6-month assignment had to leave, and there were 2 months left on his assignment, so Murray took that. And it was a wonderful experience. They gave us a condo in a place called Double Bay, and we had a view of the bay, and we had a car, and the people were so friendly. We were invited to parties and to all sorts of things there, and we hated to leave. We were wishing we had a longer place there, but that was fine. It was a wonderful experience. And we were going to buy some property in Ireland one time. Both of us have background in Ireland. My father's parents were born in Ireland, and my mother's parents were born in New York, but one came from an Irish background and the other from a German background. And that was about Murray's, his mother's family was Irish, and his father's family was Austrian. So we both had sort of Germanic and Irish connections. And so we visited everywhere. We went to Japan, we went to Turkey and Syria, and of
So
course
these places
England.
in the news now, you've been there.
Yes, and I'm so glad I did my traveling then, because now it's so dangerous that it wouldn't be worthwhile to go anyplace. I'm just happy to stay here in Pinecrest, where I feel safe and happy, and there's everything here, everything that's good.
So let's go back to the time, where Pinecrest is about to celebrate 20 years of being incorporated as a city. Were you in favor of that initially?
Yes.
And what was your reasoning then?
Well, we just felt that it was a very special place, and it looked as if they had good plans for the future, and we needed more care as far as like the neighborhood crime watch and so forth. But I found Suzanne and Al organized our street and the ends of both streets, and they did a wonderful job, and they did a plan. Each one of us got the program of the name of each person in each house, the address, the name, the phone number, and if we saw anything that we thought was suspicious, we were supposed to call in or notify people if we did hear of something going wrong. And my husband's brother was here visiting one day, and the two of them were in the garage doing something, and I was going to call them for lunch, and I just happened to look out the window, and I saw a car pull up, and it stopped between Mayor's property and the property on the corner. And the two fellows got out, and they were standing there talking, and I thought, well, that's funny. If they were going to Mayor's, why didn't they go in their driveway, or why didn't they go? So I watched a bit, and I thought, I think they're up to something, the way they were looking around and talking. So I went in the garage and I said, I think that there's something happening across the street. I said to Murray, get the license plate number of that car. Just then we heard glass break and the alarm went off over at the corner. And I called the police immediately and I said, you know, there's a robbery evidently going on. Well, the police came immediately. They caught the one fellow, went down the street, and there was a bicycle out in front of someone's house, and he got on the bicycle, was robbed, but they caught him. And the other fellow was running down the street the other way, and they caught him.
This was after incorporation.
Yes.
Because prior to incorporation, the police response was not that fast.
Well, they were very fast, and they caught the people. And we also had some drug things going on in the neighborhood. There was a place down the street here, and I forget now how we heard about that, that they thought somebody was involved with drugs. Also, this place on the corner, they had a big piece of property, and it was very heavily wooded, and we didn't know who lived there. There was somebody, a man, and we never saw a woman or anybody else. Occasionally we'd see the man come or go, because Murray was always out in the field. And we found out later that he was dealing in drugs. Oh, one thing, I was helping Murray out in the Grove one day, and I saw cars were coming, and they'd pull in the driveway and be there a little bit and then pull out, and then another car would come. And I said to Murray, something funny is going on across the street there. There are people coming and going, and I wonder what's happening there. So we reported that, and turned out it was a drug operation. And I guess these people were coming to pick up their drugs on certain days or something. But the later people who came, I don't know the new neighbors now. We all knew each other in earlier times. And the people who come in now, I don't even know their names, and they weren't interested in joining the Neighborhood Crime Watch, because Suzanne and Al Jones, as I say, they set it up for our street.
Are they still around?
Well, he's in Eastridge, and
okay.
Suzanne died earlier this year. And he's the man who was the marine biologist for the government, and a very fine gentleman. He called me up about a week ago and we had a nice chat. But we had great neighbors and we were friendly. We got together, we knew each other. But now the people are all strangers, and they didn't want to, because, Suzanne then said she designated me as the person for this end of the street to keep in touch with the people. And of course, if we saw anything or if we knew something was going on, you would call the person that you were assigned to, and then they would call the next person, and we'd call all around and advise everybody there was something going on in the neighborhood. But the new people weren't interested in doing that, so it kind of all fell apart. Although I know that they're trying to keep neighborhood crime watches going now.
It seems to be revived.
Well, that's good, because we had an excellent group and it worked very well, but now I don't know. As I say, they're all different people. I don't know who they are, and we had wonderful neighbors.
So you now are, you go to the community center. You avail yourself of that. And the library, do you use the library?
I don't go to the library anymore. It's there, and I've been thinking I should get these books that you can listen to, because it's very difficult for me to read now. But I know we have an excellent library. I've been there a few times for programs that have been presented, but I don't read very well. I read, but it's with difficulty. And I used to love to read. I would just have books, but I can't anymore. But it's just a wonderful community, a great place to live. And I have some friends from Connecticut who bought places up in Vero Beach. And they said, we should have moved to Pinecrest, because when I tell them of things that are going on down here, they say, boy, you really have a great place there and a lot of nice activities. And
do you avail yourself of the programs at Pinecrest Gardens?
Sometimes, yes.
It's a lot of cultural activities going on there now.
And we belong to Fairchild Tropical Gardens, and But Pinecrest is very special, and we have one of the leaves, you know, on that tree, the founder's tree in the garden. We have a leaf there with our names on, and anyhow, we feel very close. Well, of course, we used to go there when it was the Parrot Jungle. And remember the restaurant that was there? We used to go there every Sunday after church. We'd go and have breakfast and meet different neighbors there. It was
It's
wonderful.
right around the corner from your church.
Mm-hmm. Well, we just had to go down the street, and then a lot of people came from the Lutheran church across the street. They would come across. And
So that was a real Sunday meetup place.
yes, yes, very nice. And they talk about it, about building a new restaurant there. And when the Parrot Jungle was sold, the man who what is he called? An animal doctor.
I forget his name
I'm
too.
forgetting, but anyhow, when he bought that, and of course he has the other jungle now. What do they call that too? But anyhow, when
Yeah, it's out on Parrot Island.
yes, yes, he wanted, before he got out of Pinecrest, he wanted to build a big restaurant, sort of a night place too. And the neighbors all complained, you might remember that or know that they didn't want it. They felt they didn't mind when it was the Parrot Jungle, because people came in and it was quiet. They weren't hollering and yelling or doing, but they felt if there was going to be drinking and the place was going to be open late at night and lots of cars coming and going, people didn't want that. So that's when he sold, and thank goodness he did, because it's been a wonderful Pinecrest center.
Hopefully we'll see a restaurant there in the future. Any questions, Carl, you'd like to ask?
Just about the Logie private airport here.
Oh, yes. One of the reasons, apparently, that a lot of pilots ended up in this area is the private airport down in the Killian, off Killian. Did your husband ever fly in and out of there?
No.
Did you know anyone who had little planes?
There were some people that he knew, and I don't remember who went there now, but we mainly
Brown's Airport.
yes, and I haven't thought of some of those things in a long time, and I used to know some stories about that, but I can't think of it now. But mostly we were involved with the Miami International Airport, and but it was a wonderful group. But we used to go to the Riviera Theater, to the movies once in a while, and we'd meet all kinds of Pan Am people on the line. You know, they would always align for the evening show, and there'd be all the Pan Am people that we'd run into.
That's quite a community.
So it has been a great community. And Pan Am and Eastern were all over. The people were very much here, and it was great.
I know someone who used to work for Eastern, and she started as right out of high school. And when they folded, she said it was like losing her whole family.
Yes, it was a terrible thing, both Pan American and Eastern, because we were so close, and they were such wonderful people, and there was such good spirit about the company and each other, and we cared about each other. So
that was, did you all get together and commiserate the demise of Pan Am when it folded?
no, we didn't get, we just were all sorry and just kept our sorrow to ourselves pretty much. We were all very disappointed. And
How many years in total did you work for Pan Am?
only 10 years.
And Murray worked for them?
He started in 42 and he retired in 78.
Wow.
So he was there for his whole working life. And they had to retire, I guess they still do, at 60. And so he was born in 1918 and he retired in 78.
So during World War II, he was a civilian pilot, but he was...
with Pan Am. But they were flying, he has an honorable discharge from the Air Force because he was considered Air Force, but with Pan Am, they were flying men and material to Africa and Europe, and he has several medals. He was flying in war zones, in dangerous areas, and so forth. And so they presented him with medals and with his honorable discharge.
I imagine he had to be escorted at times in the air with
I don't know.
fighter
I don't
planes.
know. You know, they didn't
He
have
didn't
many
talk.
planes. No, I think they were on their own, and it was dangerous. But,
Did he ever talk about that?
No, no. He always just did his job, and I'd hear from other pilots sometimes. One pilot one time came in with him. I used to meet him at the airport sometimes in New York, and the pilot who was his co-pilot on that trip said to me, "Oh my God," he said, they were going to Latin America someplace, and he said, the weather was so terrible, but he said he just goes skating around. He knows how to deal with the bad weather and everything. He said he is terrific. And he was a very capable man, and I shouldn't brag about him, but he really was very special.
Go ahead and brag.